If you want to take your playing from this to this, and not only improve your comping, but get into full-blown chord solos, and also get a whole bunch of new hip modern voicings that you haven't even thought about, then today I'm going to get into two techniques about how to break that down and approach that. One of the techniques is going to be a Barney Kessel approach that he used all the time. And the other techniques for voicings and for shapes is called assume root voicings, which is a Dick Grove technique. I'm going to get into both of those at the same time today. So the first thing that I'm going to get into is Barney's approach. And what he did a lot of the time is he used simple sometimes two-part shapes, dyads, thirds, sixths, fourths, fifths, but also just full-blown triads. And today I'm going to focus on triads. But what he would do is he would use those triads. He would use the inversions of the triads. And then the big thing is he would use chromatic approaches into those triads, sliding in and out of the shapes that he was going to use to make it a lot more interesting. And you can get a lot of mileage out of it. Once we get Barney's thing down and we start getting a handle on inversions and chromatic approach chords, then we're going to get into cool voicings and better, more modern sounding voicings. And that's where the Dick Grove thing comes in. I'm going to use a technique that he had called assumed root voicings, which basically means, in a nutshell, because I'm not going to get into the whole thing today, but you can take any diatonic shape, 2-part shape, 3-part shape, 4-part shape, and beyond, from the chord family that you're using, and use any of those shapes as a voicing for that chord family. So for example, if I have a C major 7 chord, I can use D minor, I can use E minor, I can use F major, I can use F sharp diminished, I can use G major, I can use A minor, I can use B diminished, I can use B minor, all as voicings. So instead of thinking about them as their own individual chords, we're going to think about them as shapes of a C major 7 chord. And that's going to give you a lot of the color that you're looking for. It'll range anywhere from very direct and very C sounding to very indirect, not going to be as obvious that it's a C chord, and it brings in a lot more color. So for more modern voicings, people are going to like that. So let's get into the Barney Kessel thing first. What I'm going to use is the first 2 measures of the tune Just Friends. I'm doing it in the key of G because that's common to the real book and that's how people learn it. So the first chord is the C major 7, which works. Melody. So it's C major to C minor. And instead of playing those static chords, I'm going to do the Barney Kessel thing. I'm going to get rid of the 4-part chord altogether and just think about C major triad. So you can do it here, 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 and so on. So you need to know your triads for this video. If you don't know your triads, go back and learn those and then come back to this video. So what Barney Kessel would do, instead of just playing this, is he would add in chromatic approaches. So here's your fixed shape, but he would slide in and out of it. From below or from above. And you can do that as much as you can get away with. So here's an example. When you add in the inversions and do the same thing, it grows arms and legs real quick. And that's just a regular C triad. We haven't even gotten into all the other triads and all the other stuff you can do. So the first example of what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the basic C triad. And here it is, first 2 measures of Just Friends with the Barney Kessel chromatic approach. So now I just demonstrated in slow motion and in real time how to use that Barney Kessel half-step approach and how to do it on triads. And he does that all the time, and there's a lot of mileage you can get out of that. And that's kind of going to be the main thing of the Barney Kessel part of this video that I talk about. The rest of it is going to be applying that, but instead of just to a C major triad, we're going to use all the Dick Grove-isms and the assumed root triads, and I'm going to go through as many of them as I can in this video today. So the first one is the C major triad that I covered. That's going to give you the root, third, fifth of that C major 7 chord. So you're going to get your third, which is definitive, and you're going to get your root, which tells you what kind of chord it is. And if you have a bass player, it's kind of redundant. So later on, you don't need that root. We'll get rid of it. But we're starting with the basics. So root, third, fifth. You got your third, which is definition, your fifth, which is transparent, and your root, which is tells you what the chord is. Now we're going to start getting into the Dick Grove techniques where we start adding in color and adding in shading. And we're also going to combine it with the Barney Kessel technique to make it move, to give it harmonic motion. So now let's take a look at approaching E minor and using the E minor triad with Barney Kessel's chromatic approach. Thinking about it from Dick Grove's perspective, this is what he calls assumed root 3, which means we're assuming that E is the root of a shape, and this shape happens to be an E minor triad. And we're going to use that E minor triad, not as its own functioning chord, but as a shape that can be used as a voicing for a C major 7 chord. The cool thing about this is, because it's an E minor triad, it has a darker sound. It's a different set of intervals. It's very dark, but the chord's C major 7. So this gives you the third, which is definitive, the fifth, which is transparent, and the seventh, which is also definitive. So we have full definition. Now we can lose the root. And gradually we're going to start losing the root, then we're going to start losing the transparent, and then we're going to start losing the definitive until all that's left is color. So now let's move on to the next assumed root. We're going to use assumed root 5, which is G major triad. So we're assuming that G is the root of the new shape, and that shape is a 3-part voicing. So it's assumed root 5, which in this case is G major triad. The parent chord still underneath, don't forget, is a C major 7 chord, but we're going to be using that G major triad as a voicing. And what that's going to do is think about it like a polychord or a slash chord, G major over C. So that's going to give us the fifth, transparent, the seventh, which is definitive, and the ninth, which is color, heard as color, against that C. Very colorful. More colorful than this. That's very square, but now we got G major over C. Sounds a lot cooler. Let's take a look at how we use that in real time. Let's get into assumed root 7, and in this case, that's going to be B diminished triad. This is going to give you a totally different sound than all the other triads. So what this is going to give you is it's going to give you the 7th, it's going to give you the 9th, and it's going to give you the natural 11th. So this can be used as a C sus4 chord. You don't want to be playing this against the 3rd. You don't want that F up above the 3rd because you get a minor 9th chord. So this is a substitution for the 3rd. So don't play the 3rd in this. Use it as a C sus. Here's an example of that. Here's an alternative to assumed root 7. This will be a Lydian version of assumed root 7, where we use B minor 7. This is going to give us the 7th, the 9th, and the sharp 11th. And this is actually diatonic in the key. So here's an example of B minor 7. Now let's get into assumed root 9. In this case, it's going to be D minor triad. And this is going to give you the 9th, natural 11th, and 13. D minor over C. So once again, because we have the natural 11th, you just want to use this as the C sus, not, you don't want to deal with the 3rd in there. Otherwise, we got that guy again. Okay, so D minor over C sounds a lot cooler than this. You know what I mean? Getting into more color, the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th is all color. There's no definition there. So you'll hear it. Check this out. 2, 5. See, there's no definition. That's all color. The only way you're going to know this is a C chord is because the bass player, or maybe the piano player, whoever is playing that C. Okay, so here's an example of assumed root 9. The D major triad in relation to a static C major 7 chord is going to give you the 9, sharp 11, and 13. That major triad has a bright sound, but it doesn't interfere with the third like some of the sus4 voicings. So here's an example of that D major 7 with inversions and with chromatic approaches that'll make your comping a lot more hip instead of a static C major 7. The next example is assumed root 11, this is going to be a theoretical example. I'm not going to use this in Just Friends, and I'm not going to use it on a C major chord. And without getting into any theory too much, yeah, I'm just going to skip all that. I'm not doing F right now. We'll get to that later. I'll use that in another example some other time. So let's get to the Lydian alternative of assumed root 11, assumed root sharp 11, which is F sharp diminished. Sharp 11. 13. And you can see the root on top, so now it's starting to wrap back around. And I doubt you know this voicing. You know, that's not a shape that guitar players use very much. So let's take a look at that. And that fits great in the key of G. That F sharp is actually a diatonic tone in the key of G. So one of the reasons I'm not using F major 7 is because not only does that F interfere with the third in the C major 7, but it also is chromatic to the key of G. So I'm always keeping tonality in mind. So in this case, yada, 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 blah, 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 F sharp diminished. Trust me for now. We'll get into the rest of the shit later. Last example. Assumed root 13. That's going to be an A minor triad over C. So it's going to give you the 13th, the root, and then the third. And as you can see, we start wrapping back around. We got the root and the third back in the game with one color, which is the 13th. So the 13th, root, third. So here's A minor over C. So there was a lot going on in this lesson. But by the time you get done with Barney Kessel's approach, which you could just use on a C major triad and get tons of mileage. But now you got the C major triad, E minor triad, G major triad, B diminished triad, B minor triad, D minor triad, F major triad, theoretically, but not practically, F sharp diminished triad, and A minor triad. Every single one of those are going to give you different sounds and different attitudes. If you're a piano player, play a polychord. Play C in the left hand with one of these triads on top and see what that sounds like. You're gonna dig it. And also guitar players, just play the triad. Don't even bother with the root, especially if you're playing with a bass player and stuff. So anyway, this is an introduction to all that, and I'll get into a lot more Dick Grove stuff and other examples of this type of thing coming up.